Next question. Jocko, how do you read books to prepare for podcasts? How do you read a book to extract maximum benefit? Any advice on keeping yourself focused and being patient while reading books?
So this was a series of reoccurring questions that were about kind of how I read. Yeah. And I grabbed 3 of them that were in there. So how do I prepare for the podcast? It's actually a pretty in-depth situation. So first thing I do is I read the book. As I'm reading the book, I highlight anything that I find to be interesting or informative to me, or reinforce an idea that I know, or bring a new idea to bear. So as I'm going through, I'm just highlighting everything. And when I get done with, and now just to say, when we're talking max benefit, when I was in college and I would do that, I would, once I got done with highlighting the areas that I found informative or important, then I would make flashcards of the highlighted areas. Mm-hmm. So I was like double locking the information. Because as soon as I make a flashcard, I've already got it 50% in my memory. Yeah. Well, I read it, I highlighted it. It was like 25%. Mm-hmm. Make a flashcard, that's another 45 or 50%. And so boom, now I got to do study the flashcard for that last 25% to lock in the knowledge. Yeah. Where when I go in to take the test, I know 100%. I know I'm going to know every answer on the question.
When you recall like a thing, you actually recall what the flashcard looked like.
Yes.
You know how you wrote the A on that one, you know?
Yes. Yeah. So that's what I would do. This is kind of a sidetrack when I was in college, highlight and then make flashcards of what I highlighted. Now, for the podcast, what I do is once I read it and highlight it, now I go back through and I look at the highlights, and now I start being selective of what is going to be in the podcast. And I actually circle the actual words I'm going to read with a red pen that I'm holding right here. And that's what I do. I circle, and then I have little notes that say next, like when I circle a section, and then I'll either have an arrow that goes to another point, or I'll have a little note that says go to page 49, and then there'll be a tab, one of those little yellow sticky tabs on page 49. Boom, there it is. I can flip right there real quick, so we don't have to edit. We don't have to. There's a flow. I can keep rolling. And then on top of those, when I read something and I want to say something about it, I have little sticky notes that I put in there. Either sticky notes, I have the sticky tape stuff, which is pretty legit. And I roll that out. I stick it on there and I say, hey, mention, experience I had here, or what happened when I was doing this. And so I kind of make those notes, and that way I can get it done. And while I'm doing that is when I have to figure out the chronology that I'm going to read it, because I don't always read the notes from the book on the podcast in the same order that they are in the book, because sometimes it just doesn't make sense. Sometimes there's so at the same time I'm doing that, I'm going back and figuring out what direction I'm actually going to read them.
Oh, right.
So sometimes my conclusion of the book is different than the author's conclusion of the book.
Yeah.
So I got to go back and say, I got to go back pages or forward or whatever. So that's what I'm figuring out there as well. So that's kind of what the podcast prep looks like. Now, how to stay focused and patient while reading books. This is really difficult. I don't have a long attention span. When I have a long attention span, it's only because I absolutely force myself to do it. So what I would prefer to do is to read in small chunks. I want to do work for like an hour at a time, right? When I'm writing, I want to work for about an hour. When I'm reading, I want to read for about an hour. After that, I want to get up and break something, or throw something, or lift something, or run somewhere. You know what I mean? I have an hour of patience with me. Of course, unfortunately, that's not enough time, especially when you're doing a podcast a week and you got to read a whole book. Well, guess what? You got to read for longer. You got to read for 2-3 hours at a pop. I'll try and make it that I do an hour early in the morning. Sometimes when I'm behind the curve, I will read first thing in the morning before I work out, because I just want to get an hour done. Then I get to go and release, right? Then I get done with the workout, take a shower. Now I'm going to read for another 45 minutes. Okay, good. Now I'll do something else. Little pre-lunch reading. So, and then before I go to bed, I'm doing another hour. So there, I just got 4 or 5 hours in a day without having to sit down and do something for 4 or 5 straight hours, which bothers the hell out of me. The other thing you can do, and I do this, is I'll read multiple books at the same time, which is which is an interesting tactic. I don't know if everybody should do that or could do that or would want to do that, but sometimes one book gets boring. But I know I got to read, so I just have 2 books, 3 books, all sitting there, and I'm reading them all at the same time, and that makes them a little bit more interesting. And the last thing I would say about trying to be focused on and patient when you're reading books is to try to really understand what it is that is happening in the book, not just from a plot perspective, but from a human perspective. Oh, yeah. What is that person going through? What is that like for that person? What are they thinking? And I get to a point where I'm so engaged, I feel like I'm becoming the author. I feel like I'm in the book sometimes when I'm reading it. Yeah. So that is another good way to keep it engaging, because if you're seeing it from the outside and you're not really in it, well then it's just not as engaging, simply put. If you get into it and you start thinking about that person, you go back, do a little Wikipedia search on the author and see who they are. That gives you like a little insight.
Yeah.
And that helps me. Now I connect with them. I know that they're from New Jersey. I know that they went to this college. I know that they played soccer. So now when I'm reading about them, I'm going, oh yeah, so I try and get a little background on that person. Gives me a little bit more engagement.
Dang.
That's that. That's my reading habits.
It's kind of advanced, and it makes more sense. I think that, like how you say you want to put yourself in the guy's head, actively, I'm going to consciously put myself in the guy's head. Sometimes people are so good at writing where that just happens naturally. But when you do that, it's like you can kind of get the story, of course, but most of the time all the time it's lessons learned. Like, what do you learn? It's almost like when your head is in it like that, all the lessons are just flying into your brain, Yeah. Because it's almost like you're doing, like, you're going through that war or that particular ambush or something like that. And then, they talk about the mistakes and all that, but you feel the mistake.
Yeah. And also, I have some experience with what they're talking about.
Oh yeah. So it's like
and I'm not saying, I'm telling you right now, I don't have even close to the experience of the books that I'm reading on this podcast. These guys that were in the Battle of Iwo Jima and the Battle of the Bulge. No, nothing I did compared to anything that they do. But do I know what it's like to be waiting to go into a bad situation? Do I know what it's like to be shot at? Do I know what it's like to, have guys getting wounded? Yeah, I know what that's like. So that's a little connection too. But I think, everybody that's been in stressful situations of any kind, you can say, oh, what must that feel like? Right. Hey, I know what it's like when I was waiting to go in for a job interview and I was completely stressed out, and that's what this guy must be feeling right here. Only even worse. So then you make that little mental connection, a little mental leap, and you can, like you said, you can then learn more from it.
Yeah.
Which is important.
Yeah. So if I'm going into this particular situation, in a book, I'm reading it, and I'm not as engaged as maybe I could be. This guy goes through XYZ experience. I'm looking at it from my opinion, like, well, I could handle that, kind of thing. But this guy's the type of guy who that's maybe part of his weakness or something like that. And vice versa, where, like, I don't know, something about claustrophobia. I might be like, dang, but that claustrophobia part of the story isn't necessarily a huge part of the lesson that you're trying to get from it. Right. So you might there might be some disconnects there if you don't. Because they have a certain intention, and you have a certain intention. So if yours is the lessons learned, you might miss some of those lessons. Just the feeling of missing.
For sure. I'm not going to get everything out of a book. That's why when you get a really good book, you read it multiple times, and you get more out of it every single time that you read it. No doubt about that one.
Yeah, it's true.